You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Cricket Podcast's preview series for the 2021 IPL. On this episode we will be talking about last year's runners-up, the Delhi Capitals. I'm Jack Hope and I'm joined by Ross Legg. How you doing, Ross?
Yep, I'm wonderful, thanks mate.
I'm joined by Max Rowe Brown.
Hiya, I'm getting excited now. We're getting close.
I forgot to say how are you doing to you. And we're joined by Dan Weston. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm good, Jack. All good.
Cool. Before we get into the Capitals, a quick reminder to like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on or watching. And that you should head over to our Twitter at the Cricket Pod or our Instagram, also at the Cricket Pod. And on Thursday this week, 9:30 p.m. in India, 5 p.m. in the UK, we're doing a live stream of some IPL stuff. We'll have a Q&A. We've got like overall predictions. And, you know, we've got a random draw, which is going to be really, really good. Ross, talk to me about Delhi, but don't talk to me about the cricket team. I want to know about Delhi first.
Delhi.
And so does the dog. The dog definitely wants to hear about Delhi. So Delhi is India's capital. It is the second most populated city in the world with 31 million people. So there's plenty of fans. If you're going to go for a local fan base, that is a good fan base to go for.
We should break our download record.
Well, quite possibly. It is home to the world's tallest brick structure, the Qutub Minar, which stands at 73 meters. So if you've ever been impressed by kind of clay that's been in a kiln for a little while, then that is your kind of thing to go for. It's a really nice juxtaposition of Delhi. 20% of it is covered by greenery and forestry, but it is one of the most polluted cities of the world, ranked number 5 in 2019. But sanitation, and this is critical in the developing world and in the developed world, is clearly. It should be on everyone's mind. Hygiene is the word of the year in terms of washing your hands of COVID, etc. And Delhi went one better. They have the world's only international toilet museum.
That is good.
What more do you want?
That's a commitment to hygiene.
That really and truly is.
As long as you wash your hands after you've been.
And then to wrap up the intro, we'd have to go to the cricket team. This team used to be called the Delhi Daredevils, but because, like many Daredevils, they always promised so much and just ultimately delivered heartbreak to their families and fans, they had to change it, right? So they changed the name in 2018 to the Delhi Capitals because Delhi is the power centre of the country. It is the capital. Therefore, we name them Delhi Capitals, is what their owner came out and said. All in all, though, Delhi sounds like a great place. I would love to visit, and I think they are, as you said in the build-up, they are one of the best teams in the IPL. So let's start talking about kind of their pedigree. One of the best teams last year. They've never won the competition. I don't know, flattered to deceive sometimes, and they did pick up the reputation of being called Delhi Capitals by some unruly areas of their fan base. Not sure if that was related to the toilet museum, but we'll have to wait and see. They are coached by Ricky Ponting, and that is a really important factor, Ricky Ponting doing this, because they picked up a certain someone in the IPL auction, which didn't particularly make sense to anybody. Jack, have you seen what's happened or seen who's come in to replace Shreyas Iyer, who's been ruled out of the tournament or most of the tournament with injury?
No, I have 100% seen this, but I've forgotten.
Oh, well, it's our boy, Rishabh Pant.
Oh, yes. Of course it is. I thought you meant selected to replace him. Yes, Pant, not Ashwin. That's a disgrace. It's an affront to all thinking cricketers. Although I'm sure Rishabh Pant and the many Rishabh Pant fans out there will be happy with the decision.
So sometimes I kind of think they've done a bit of an England here. They've taken what is a promising young player who has just come into a bit of form, and they've gone, burden of captaincy. That's what this guy needs. When they've got people like Rahane, they've got people like Ravichandran Ashwin kind of in their side, And I think that's a missed opportunity for them. So not entirely convinced it is the right decision.
It's
but
difficult though,
fair
isn't
play.
it? Because he was the vice captain, so you then have the danger of saying, "I know you're the vice captain, but we actually don't want you to be the captain when the captain's not here." Sorry.
Yeah, and there is some succession planning. I mean, we've taken the mick out of some of these teams who clearly don't do any succession planning, and actually, this is probably quite a nice thing to do. But
Yeah.
I just thought in this tournament, when Delhi they're so close to having the opportunity to win here, that they could have had a proper outstanding captain. But sometimes, and some certain people on this podcast don't see how much impact a captain actually has on a T20 side. So
On the other hand, we don't know that Rishabh Pant is a bad captain. He might be. It might turn out that he's
He
fantastic.
could be
and
Maverick genius.
Yeah, he could be a maverick genius.
I'm not saying he could be a good or a bad captain. I think my argument here is that the burden of captaincy, regardless of any team, sometimes has the opposite effect, right? You stop scoring runs, you stop being so free spirited, you stop being Rishabh Pant. And I just think risking that is not what you want when he didn't have a very good IPL 20. You want him to go in just being like, I'm going to go and smash loads of runs all over the place. Let's talk about their squad. Dan, from an auction strategy point of view, RCB done them a kipper, didn't they?
Well, it worked out that way, I think. Although you could say that maybe we talked a bit in the Sunrisers podcast about kind of them having a sort of second chance to make it right, and I think Steve Smith coming in for Shreyas Iyer. That Iyer's injury has kind of made the Smith purchase look astute, where I think realistically it probably wasn't. I don't understand why a team who's already got Rahane and Shreyas Iyer as local players would need Smith as an overseas. It just makes no sense whatsoever. So my notes on them for prior to the auction were need opening batsmen, lower order hitters and all-rounders, and a high-quality pace bowler. Well, Steve Smith certainly doesn't fit into any of those brackets at all.
Hey, he could bowl.
So it just made no sense to me at all. Whether the RCB were done them up like a kipper is another matter entirely. Maybe they just cost them a little bit more than maybe they would just bought him at 2 crore anyway. I don't know, but
So,
yeah.
Is there that bit? So we've mentioned it before, but there's quite a lot of Australians in the IPL.
Yes.
And Ricky Ponting being the leader and legend of Delhi Capitals, and Steve Smith kind of coming in, is there an Aussie bias that does exist because of the coaches that are in play? And there's loads of Aussie coaches in T20 cricket, or is it just a case of that recency bias that we've talked about before, Jack?
In this one, I think, like, to answer your points individually, I think having loads of Australian coaches definitely means that more Australian players get picked up because people know about them, whereas they probably don't know about other players. The other thing, like, just on that point as well, is that these coaches they coach their IPL franchise for only some of the year, so they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to go and scout the Blast and then go and scout the CPL. It's they're very much sort of in, do the job for a bit, and then out. I think the on the recency bias point, Dan, you've talked about this loads. I think having the what's it called, the Big Bash, as like the prelude to the IPL auction is an absolute, like, godsend for a lot of middleweight Australian cricketers
The prawn cocktail to the roast dinner.
Yeah, they're just presented in the shop window, and they don't even have to necessarily do that well. They just have to play well, like, twice, and then probably an Australian coach will be like, "Yeah, we'll have you." And that probably, that recency bias, that probably also extends into the Australian international summer. I think in the case of Smith, I don't think it's necessarily one of those picks. I think it's that his name is Steve Smith and everyone knows he's one of the best batters in the world. And then they don't necessarily complete that thought process, which is in Test cricket. I mean, like, if I owned a franchise, you couldn't pay me to take Steve Smith, let alone get me to fork over money to bring him into my team. I just think there are so many better options, and most critically, there are plenty of better Indian options to perform that. Like, well, I mean, let's be honest, it's going to be a pretty bog standard anchor role. It's the least important position in the team in the IPL because there's just so many people who can do it.
Mhm. Well, very well put. So, speaking about the strong Indian batting talent, they do actually have a really good core of Indian players in this side. So, Shikhar Dhawan, Prithvi Shaw, Rahane, Pant. I mean, Shreyas Iyer obviously out injured. That is a good core of Indian batsmanship. And I think Prithvi Shaw was terrible, it's fair to say, in the last one, but he has picked up form recently, so that could bode well for them throughout the tournament. And they do like to have a bit of faith in people, which I think is great to see. Dan, you mentioned Stoinis earlier on one of the earlier podcasts. I was surprised to see that he was moved up and down so much, but that was because of the imbalance in their squad, right?
Yeah.
But Shimron Hetmeyer, what is he doing back in this team? Like, surely he was one of the bit. If you were going to go for an auction strategy, Shimron Hetmeyer would have been released back into the player pool, and you could probably have picked him up for a much cheaper price or a better player.
Agree completely, and I put that in my Twitter mega thread at the time as well. That I just don't understand the rationale of retaining Hetmeyer for such a big price when they already had a low budget. So they could have freed up a space, they could have freed up a budget to really make some better choices. I'm pretty sure that the way that the auction transpired, that you could have got Hetmeyer back for base price if you wanted to. The demand on overseas batters was minimal, so I don't see Hetmeyer retention being smart at all. Now, also, as you say, Ross, you could have picked up a better player as well, and there were players out there who I perceive to be better overseas options than Shimron Hetmeyer. I don't have Hetmeyer in my best Delhi 11 at the moment, so I think that probably maybe says a lot as well. Yeah, and with Stoinis, you mentioned about his role. It's a bit of a strange one with him because a couple of years back, I really was strong on the opinion that he could only open and he could be a liability batting anywhere else. But he's kind of flipped the switch a bit, and he's got a lot better later on in his team's innings and struggles a bit more. Takes the Kohli role, if you like, in the first half of his team's innings, and then looks to try and accelerate. So he's kind of brought a different string to his bow. I'm still not a massive lover of players who don't have a massive peak strike rate and you don't get 4 overs out of them either. And I call them luxury players basically, and I'm not a huge fan of those type of players. Be it someone like Stoinis or Brathwaite or some similar type of players.
He does have a good smile though, so
Well,
that's a big plus point when it comes to sponsorship. So let's always consider that. Let's switch and talk about their bowling. So their bowling lineup is a strong lineup, right? So they've got Rabada, they've got Nortje. Both are probably going to be missing for the first game, maybe the second game, which is an issue for them. But actually, that is supported by the tormentors of England in the test matches of Ashwin and Akshar Patel. I mean, if you were to look for a couple of a left arm spinner and a right arm spinner combination, it proved deadly in the test matches. Max, do you think they're going to combine well again here for Delhi?
I don't think it'll be quite the same, will it? But Ashwin is such a seasoned and wily competitor that he is going to be a nightmare for whoever comes up against him. Akshar Patel, I don't see him being quite as devastating as he was in the England series, but I can see him being difficult to get away consistently, given the pace that he bowls at with his spin and that angle that he bowls with. So certainly a good spin twin to have, and I would say a level above what a lot of the other teams might have, including the likely favourites and holders.
Jack, when you've spoken about Akshar Patel, you've said that he's probably going to only play a handful of tests in India. He won't actually make that much of an impact on the global global cricket stage. And you watched a hell of a lot of IPL last year. What are your thoughts on Axar?
Well, so the reason I don't think Axar Patel is going to play 100 tests for India is that Ravi Jadeja exists. And out of India, the need for 2 Ravi Jadejas or even someone to augment Ashwin, if you don't pick a second spinner, is minimal. Possibly the weak point, or one of the weak points with Delhi Capitals, and one of the reasons why I overall am not so hot on them this year, is that they don't really have a top line leg spinner. Now they kind of get away with that a little bit because they probably have the 2 best finger spinners in Ashwin and Patel, but I do think that they can't get away from that reality, and that reality is that they have 2 guys who aren't. I mean, Ashwin's maybe a bit more of a wicket threat, but Patel's just not really much of a wicket threat at all for Delhi Capitals. So last season they managed to get away with that, I think, a little bit. So his economy rate was reasonably low, but he didn't take it. He was taking more wickets a Test match in against England than he managed in the entire IPL last year. I'm not sure I love that part of their lineup, if I'm honest.
So you talked about they don't have a leg spinner. So Amit Mishra is their leading wicket taker in the history of it. And I think he's probably about 35.
Yeah, well, so that
38.
Yeah, that's a problem. And I mean, what, do they bring him in for Patel, and then they don't bat so deep? Do they play do they make some kind of decision between Mishra and Sharma, and then maybe go with 3 spinners, which again is not necessarily ideal, and probably means that you're giving over to Stoinis that might not be optimal either. I've been puzzling around that a little bit, and I just don't know whether I love Patel and Ashwin in the same side, basically.
Brilliant. So in terms of their pace bowlers, I did mention Rabada and I did mention Nortje, and I don't think we need to go into loads of detail on them. They are both really good, and they are both really quite fast. I think out of the Nortje was faster than Jofra Archer last year in that lineup on the old speed gun in top 10 deliveries. They do have a little English contingent in the pace bowling front, though. They have Chris Wokes, who has had a storming winter, been on holiday to Sri Lanka and has been on holiday to India, and had a lovely time. And then they also splashed out an obscene amount of money on someone we have panned for the last few India versus England T20 and ODIs in Tom Curran. Max, you are the Surrey man on the podcast. What is he doing in an IPL franchise?
Yeah, good question, isn't it? Well, I mean, for that much money, I don't know what he's doing in an IPL franchise. I could see him being somewhere as a backup for slightly less, but for people to bid the price that high after the season he had last year, which wasn't exactly elite, it's puzzling, but it's perhaps it's that thing where he's that Jack mentioned, the recency bias of the BBL. He does quite well in the Blast, and people, maybe they're still expecting him to replicate that form on both the international stage and in IPL cricket.
Dan, do you think there's ever a case of mistaken identity at an IPL auction?
It could be, but being that Sam has already retained, I think that's very, very different, and he's got a different name as well. I think that's quite tough. I mean, like if it was like Ollie Robinson of Kent and Ollie Robinson of Sussex, and it got mixed up, I could kind of understand it. But yeah, it's not quite the same. And yeah, I kind of echo what you guys say about the Tom Curran purchase. The crazy thing about this whole situation is he went for 5.25 crore. So, and you have to get to 5.25 crore, you have to have interest from multiple teams at high prices, and that just blows my mind. If you look at Curran's economy in the last couple of years, it's really not good. He domestically, from 2019 onwards, his economy is 10.7 at the death, and 8.8 in the power play. And broadly similar numbers for England as well in that time frame as well in terms of economy in T20 internationals. Yeah, I don't understand why anyone would pay 5.25 crore for an overseas player with those numbers. I just don't get it. Yeah, he can bat a bit, but he's not nearly as good a hitter as Sam, his brother. And I just don't see where he fits in this lineup, because we talked earlier about the spin options of Delhi. Now, if you want to pit Ashwin, Mishra, and Axar all in the same team, you really have to compromise on your pace options. And probably you might have to leave Ishant Sharma out, for example, because you're going to pick Rabada and Nortje as your two out-and-out pacers. If you want to go three paces, you would go probably Rabada, Nortje, Ishant, and then drop one of the spinners, possibly Axar Patel, because I don't think many IPL teams are going to want to go into a match without a leg spinner, and Ashwin obviously kind of picks himself. So I just don't see, one, I don't see the logic of the price, and two, I don't see how he fits into this team. So just kind of blew my mind a bit, really.
Yeah,
Maybe he's just there to tide them over while Rabada's away. They're just like, we need somebody to bowl some overs. So, well, they're bidding for him. He must be good.
Did RCB bid the price up again?
England's forgotten man Chris Wokes probably as well. Probably ahead of him in the bowling lineup. I would hope to see, but I never know with the IPL kind of choices over, or the England choices for that matter, on Chris Wokes. Dan, you mentioned Ishant Sharma, so he was out injured for the last IPL and didn't play too many games at all. They've also got Umesh Yadav, who you rate particularly highly, don't you?
No. So Umesh Yadav is a good power play bowler, but I kind of draw the line after that, and that's an issue that I have with one phase bowlers, if you like, is that it's very, very difficult to get four overs of positive expectation output out of them, and yeah, uninspired by that. And one pace option that I'm quite interested in, and I wonder if he might play a bit actually, because he's realistically probably their only left arm pace option is Lukman Meriwala, who's a 29-year-old but coming into the IPL for the first time. Now, he took 31 wickets in the last 2 years of the Syed Mushtaq Ali Trophy at an average of 12. So that's impressive. Cost 20 lakh, the only left armer in their bowling group. And I do think maybe if Ishant doesn't play, could he even be like a kind of a flyer that goes under the radar a little bit and has a good season.
Mm-hmm. Well, that kind of rounds up on the player front. In terms of their chances, I think last year they did as well as they possibly could have done, obviously finishing runners up in the competition, but there was a bit where they were a distant second to Mumbai Indians. Jack, do you think the changes that they've made in the lineup kind of has got them closer, or are they now further away from where they were last season?
Yes, like you, I thought last year that Delhi might be the team that could potentially step up a gear and challenge Mumbai this year. Some of their players were heading the right way in terms of age towards peaks. I thought they'd have the opportunity to reshuffle their deck in terms of overseas players. And, interestingly, this auction was also quite well set up for them in that the big spenders or the big money went on pace bowlers, overseas pace bowlers, which they don't need. They have Rabada and Nortje. They just didn't need to get involved in that market. They could have swept up on whichever batter they wanted, basically, and been able to outbid anyone, knowing that they didn't have to cover their arse by picking up a pacer at another time. They didn't do any of that, though. They bought Steve Smith, and they might get away with that because Shreyas Iyer's out injured. That could have been like an all-time dumb decision, and it probably, in terms of judging process, we probably should be thinking about that. The reality is they might need someone like Steve Smith around a little bit at the moment. I still think you can put together a lineup without him that would be very effective and might actually be better than what they'll end up playing. But I think he will play now and he'll cover that Iyer role. To answer your question about whether they've got any closer, I don't think so. I think they're probably further away. I actually, would question whether this team's capable of making the playoffs. I'm just not excited by really any of their players. I mean, I'm looking through it. I'm like, who on that list? There's not really any fear factor with the bat. There's not an awful lot of fear factor with the ball, besides maybe Rabada. And even Rabada goes at 9 and over in the IPL. He takes a lot of wickets, really, really good strike rate. I think it's about 13. But he's Spenny, a very expensive bowler.
I think I slightly disagree on the bowling front. I think Nortje has come on and shown that he's actually a quality short format bowler in the recent years. I think that Ashwin is, as we always say, is a canny operator and can win them games. I also think that their lineup, in terms of kind of having Darwan in there, yes, Hales would have made this team miles better. It would have made it a completely different proposition at that top of the order. But I do think that altogether, the fact that they've kept their squad in a relatively kind of similar manner, I can't see them falling out of the playoffs, and I can't see them doing any work. Like maybe third if one of two things doesn't go their way.
I don't know. I just don't. I'm just looking at that and I'm not buying it. I think the other teams have improved weak spots, and maybe the reason Delhi looked comparatively good last year was they were playing in a bit of a weak field. I mean, I'm looking at that. I really don't like that their leg spinners ancient and probably the worst of the frontline leg spinners. Even Ashwin has probably seen better days in limited overs cricket, if we're being honest. I mean, like there's a big name, but you're constructing a franchise. Do you want Ashwin or do you want to take a punt on Ravi Bishnoi? I'd probably go Ravi Bishnoi, and that might be a big call, and you could say that's sort of vaguely insane, but I just think that the upside on a 20-year-old leg spinner who's going in the right direction versus a finger spinner who clearly is prioritising red ball cricket at this point in his career. Has got no ambition really to get back in the India, or no serious ambition, I think, to get back in the white ball India team. I just don't see that comparison there, to be honest. And then, like Prithvi Shaw couldn't buy a run last year. Shikhar Dhawan, decent anchoring opening batter, not particularly scary. Rahane, he's a test match player. Smith, test match player. Stoinis, is he your number 5? Is he the best number 5 that teams in the IPL? Is he even a particularly competitive number 5? I mean, Dan's explained it already. He's a guy who doesn't have a particularly high peak strike rate, which is exactly what you want from a guy batting number 5. Then you have Rishabh Pant, and that's basically the whole team is resting on him having an insane IPL. And I don't even know where they're going to bat him. I mean, I think there's a serious possibility that Ricky Ponting has him batting 6, which would be mental, like completely mental. And one of the most sort of dumb things you could possibly do. And I have a feeling that they'll conspire to do that. And if they don't, who's batting 6? I mean, is maybe it becomes Stoinis, or maybe Smith bats there. It's just so many things that don't make sense about this lineup this year.
Perfect.
In my book, anyway.
Perfect. That is what we want at the podcast. Right. So in terms of their kit, let's just talk about the kit. It is boring. It's like this is like somebody has gone into like a t-shirt generator and just gone, oh, I like a tiger. Let's have watermark of a tiger, bit of blue, bit of red. You're not going to buy it compared to some of the other ones. In terms of why you should support them, Rishabh Pant, Ravi Ashwin. Yep. But I'm struggling with it. You like the second most populated city on the planet? Don't know. But there is those bit where they're not a team that you are actively going out of your way to be like, I'm a Delhi Capitals fan. But we like to be proven wrong. Max, there's a couple of Twitter questions, and I'm going to come to you first. Will the captaincy impact on Rishabh Pant as much as I alluded to earlier, or do you think actually he's going to be Rishabh Pant is going to Rishabh Pant?
I don't think it'll affect him. I just don't know how good he is as a captain. I don't know what his experience is, and it might affect the team more than it would affect Rishabh Pant. But I don't see Rishabh Pant being the kind of person who would be that impacted by the burden of captaincy. He'd probably just laugh it off. But what I would say is that with people like Rahane and Ashwin around him, he's got a good support team to help him out in those situations. So I think it'll be okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for IAM_V25 for that question. Dan, coming to you next. Lalit Yadav is a good finisher in domestic cricket. Is that true? And secondly, can you see him playing any of the games?
Okay, sorry. I'm just first of all, I'm just recovering from falling off my chair after Jack said that Steve Smith might bat 6.
No, I didn't say that, but I just can't see. Like,
I know what you mean. Yeah, they might actually think it's a good idea, which is always the worst decision of all time. I think out in a strong heat. Lalit Yadav is okay. So this is so interesting because a lot of the IPL franchises, they pick guys at like 20 lakh or whatever. It's just like squad fillers. I think in one of the other podcasts, Ross might have talked about them as just traveling on the bus with the superstars kind of thing. But Delhi have gone down a different road, and they actually look like they've done some half decent research into some viable squad players at that low price point. And Lalit Yadav is clearly one of them. He's got a strong boundary percentage as a real hitter and an off-spin all-rounder. The problem is, for Yadav, is that you don't need 2 off-spinners in the same team because they only really match up well against left-handers, and there's not that many left-handers generally. So, for Lalit Yadav to play, they need to drop Ashwin. And I'm not quite convinced that will happen.
I don't know if Ashwin mancad someone again, Ponting will lose his mind and he'll have to drop him.
Maybe that was the thinking about giving the captaincy to Rishabh Pant. They didn't want Ashwin to have extra kind of responsibility to strip him of the mancad. But another player as well, I mentioned Meriwala earlier, but there's also Ripal Patel, who's hit almost 30% boundaries in the last 2 years of Syed Mushtaq Ali as well. So they kind of have a few players at that low price who could do a good job for them and kind of come out from nowhere really and be a potential star. And I'm quite excited to see if Delhi give them an opportunity as opposed to kind of the veteran season names Jack mentioned kind of earlier, I think, about having a lot of test match players in their group. And I would much rather see a Ripal Patel given a chance than a Steve Smith and then use the overseas slot for someone else, definitely.
Okay, well, Jack, you've given us a rousing endorsement of why Delhi aren't going to make the playoffs. And I
would say I think they'll be 5th or 6th. I think they have a chance. I don't think they're Rajasthan Royals awful. But I also don't think I think that we've talked about 3 or 4 better teams.
Mm-hmm. Max and Dan. Max, do you first? Playoffs or no playoffs?
I think they will, actually. I disagree with Jack because although what I do agree with is that they haven't improved the team in terms of the auction and what they could have done, I think last year they were comfortably the closest challengers to Mumbai Indians, and where they fell down was a lack of striking. And I think part of that was because Rishabh Pant scored a strike rate of 110 last year, and he looks like a new man. So I suppose what I'm saying is kind of in agreement with Jack in that the entire team rests on Rishabh Pant's shoulders. But if he performs like he has done this winter, then there's every chance he could propel them to a top 2 spot.
Dan, let's finish on you.
Okay, so my notes on Delhi's chances in advance, I wrote, completely ignored the requirements at auction, but still one of the better sides. But there's a big caveat there, in my opinion, because we spoke a bit earlier about the availability of the South African pace bowlers, Rabada and Nortje. And if they're unavailable for any of the tournament, that's the huge caveat. Because if you're replacing Rabada with Tom Curran, that is a significant downgrade. And I would be much less bullish on their chances then. And I think that they would really struggle if they lose Rabada and Nortje for any decent amount of time in the tournament.
Yeah, the Rabada Tom Curran thing is kind of like getting rid of fiber optic broadband and getting dial up, isn't it? Anyway, that's a nice place to finish. That's a nice way to finish. So that has been our review of Delhi Capitals. We've got one team next on our final podcast, which is Mumbai Indians. So catch that.
You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
I think it was a disgraceful performance, and I think it should never be permitted to happen again.
That is very good.